Hey guys, this video is going to go over the history of alcohol palettes, so how they originated, the differences between my three most used brands, so what makes them unique and what their individual strengths are. Basically, it's a video for those who like to know things. For my research for this video, I chatted to Kenny Myers, who created Skin Illustrator. I also talked to Alden from European Body Arts, and I chatted to Nick Dorning, who created Bluebird. For the history of alcohol inks, it started with a guy named Fred Blau and his team, but not for skin tones. It actually started as a fake tattoo coloring system. So Blau first created a formula for the 1969 film The Illustrated Man, and then from that experience he was also hired on the 1981 film Tattoo. At the time there were no alcohol inks, so they created this to fill the gap for something that was long-lasting and realistic looking for a fake tattoo. And this spawned off the company Real Creations. I only have the Real hair palette, but they have alcohol inks and palettes. But initially I think their palettes only had the ink colors, like the faded tattoo colors, and they also had primary colors. They didn't have any skin tones initially. So it started being developed for the Illustrated Man, and then it was further refined for tattoo, and then it became Real Creations, and they started selling products for industry and commercial use. It started with alcohol inks, and then it moved on to palettes, and I'm sure while the aesthetic of the palettes probably would have been quite similar. So you put in alcohol, you mix it up, it liquefies, you paint it onto the skin, and then it dries down. The materials are probably quite different back then in terms of the resins, how finely milled it is, and it's moved on with the degree of technology and what's now available in terms of materials, etc. But that was the starting point of it all. Which then brings us to the 80s, and we had a Mr. Kenny Myers who's working in the industry, and he went up to Fred and he was like, "Yo, Fred," probably not saying "yo, Fred," but he was like, "Fred, can we please have some skin tones, because mixing all the primary colors to make your skin tones takes a long amount of time." And Fred was kind of like, "Nah, like if you're allowed to make your own skin tones, bro." Probably not how that went down. Anyway, so then Kenny went, okay, and he went and created his own palettes, which then kind of birthed Skin Illustrator. And he wasn't doing it to try and create like a brand name or anything like that. It was literally just like a tool that he needed to fulfill a specific purpose in his kit. So before Skin Illustrator, before the skin tones came about, if you wanted a pre-mixed skin tone, it was usually only available in the rubber mask grease paints. So if you've ever tried those, you know, they're quite thick, they're quite opaque. Obviously, if you're creating skin tones, the alcohol palettes, especially with today's technologies with silicone and stuff like that, the alcohol palettes are really, really nice. You get the transparent coverage. It sits really nicely on a range of materials. Like technically, there's a lot of reasons why you kind of needed the skin tones in the alcohol paints and why they're so widely used today. So in saying that, Skin Illustrator wasn't ever meant to be like a really opaque thing like the rubber mask grease paints or like face paint. It was always designed to be kind of transparent so that you can build up really nice translucent skin tones, so you can get that nice realistic layering effect. Then in 2000, Kenny teamed up with PPI, and PPI are now who manufacture the Skin Illustrator palettes for Kenny. So a little bit about my thoughts about Skin Illustrator. So they are one of like the oldest palettes, especially in terms of skin tones and things like that. Because of their rich history and because of their range of colors, like they are so widely known in the industry. You know, if I were to say cool tone to somebody, or you know, light mauve or whatever it is, like people probably know what I'm talking about. It's like specific colors in mind that have the names attached in my head now, and it's always Skin Illustrator. Also, because they were the first palette that I kind of grew up using when I was doing makeup, these are the palettes that I own the most of and the palettes that I use the most. And I think like around the world you find that these are kind of the industry standard palette as well. For me, one of the things that I like the most about the Skin Illustrator, firstly, like the Complexions palette is my most used palette. I find that these are really nice skin finishes and really nice adjusters. So the cool tone has a really nice transparency to it. The vein tone can get a little bit too blue, so if you're trying to adjust for blue tones, if you have a really opaque or really pigmented blue, it can get like really blue looking really quickly, whereas the cool tone has a really nice translucency to it, so it's quite easy to work with that. I use that color a lot. But for me, I think their biggest strength is how many pinks they have. Like in my other palettes that I use, like nobody has this range of pinks, and this is what I like using to fill my wounds. I just feel like they've got kind of all the bases covered there. So that is my favorite palette and my favorite thing about Skin Illustrator. Then the next company to come along out of the four that I'm talking about today, so Real Creations, Skin Illustrator, and then we have European Body Arts. This was developed in 2002. And they had a little bit of a different start. They started out by making alcohol-based airbrush tattoo inks, which is now known as Endura. and since they are for airbrush tattoos, they are designed to be extremely pigmented inks. Then NYX Harara came to EBA and said it'd be really good for haunted houses because of how pigmented it is, so they started using their products in a lot of haunted houses as well. And then once they started getting in contact with the effects artists that were working in the haunted houses, they started developing more lines of products for the working effects artists to use in the industry. So I think the first collections of colors they came up for in the inks were the undead colors and then the SFX colors, and then people said they should start developing those into palettes as well, which is when they started making their alcohol palettes. So for them, it was about creating an alcohol palette that was slightly different to what was already on the market, and also taking what made Endura so popular, which is ultra pigmentation. So you'll find that a lot of their colors are quite pigmented. The other thing which makes them unique is that all of their pans are removable and customizable. So this is the light to dark shade palette. Let me just get that focused in there. So it will have all the shades that are on there, but you can also customize your own palettes when you're buying them. There's a standard size, but you can also get like smaller onset palettes as well. And if you, let me just try and do this on camera. So there's little lips here that you can grab your finger into. So it says what the color is on the back, and then if you wanted to switch up your palettes or create a customized palette, or if you ran out of one color and you needed to replace it, you can buy the individual pans, which is quite handy. So for Skin Illustrator and Bluebird, you can refill your palettes buying the liquid inks and then pouring them in. The one problem for me being in Australia is that it's like really hard to get hazardous shipping over here. So Bluebird's easier because it's already in Australia, but it has to be ground transport. Trying to get Skin Illustrator over to Perth when I used to live there was quite difficult, but in Sydney they have stockers here luckily. But you know, if you're trying to cut down on international shipping with hazardous, you know, the extra cost of hazardous shipping, then having these individual refillable pans is quite a good idea. Then around 10 years ago came the homegrown Australian brand of Bluebird FX. So Nick, similar to Kenny, was working in the industry and felt like there was something missing in his kit, so he created his own products to kind of fill that void. And then he began selling these products to makeup artists that were working on Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3. So during filming of Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3, they came across some unique problems that involved a rain machine and recycled water. So the alcohol inks, they needed something that would stand up a lot longer and a lot stronger against kind of naturally occurring acids that might be coming out in human. Basically something that would last a really long amount of time and not come off under these really harsh conditions. So Nick came up with this product which would withstand conditions that other products could not, which I will attest to because when I've been using my Bluebird inks, sometimes I'll use other companies' removers and these like won't budge at all. I've had to go back and find my Bluebird removers and use those to get off the Bluebird inks. In Australia, there's not really a lot of cosmetic manufacturing because we are quite far away. We have to import all of the raw ingredients from overseas, and then if we're selling it back out to like America or the UK or wherever, then you have to export it back out again, and the international shipping gets quite expensive. The raw ingredients just aren't really existent here. So Nick imports all of the ingredients into Australia, he hand mixes it here, and then he exports it back out again. Initially, he was just exporting it out to people that were working in the industry, like those on Pirates of the Caribbean. After they finished filming 2 and 3, I think they continued to use his products because they really liked it. So if you're working on a film in the industry, you're ordering stuff in like bulk. He didn't have the smaller bottles or smaller palettes to be able to easily sell it to like your average consumer or makeup artist. So with encouragement from Scott, from Scotty's Makeup here in Australia, he started developing these more commercial lines and things for individual use. Like these palettes. So ironically, in the beginning, Bluebird was actually more well known outside of Australia with international artists, but now it's got more of a following in Australia as well. It's also got quite a few worldwide stockists now as well. So what makes Bluebird unique is it is the most expensive palette on the market. So it costs them about 5 to 6 times what you'd pay in LA for the raw materials to get it exported all the way over to Australia. So Nick knew that he had to make these palettes really good because otherwise why would you buy the most expensive palette on the market if it wasn't outperforming those at a cheaper price point? He knew that he couldn't compete on price, so instead he's tried to compete on quality. So I know that a lot of my really experienced industry friends have been doing this for, you know, like decades and whose opinions I really highly value, pretty much all of them have Bluebird in their kit. Like, it is really popular amongst the industry pros. I think that's kind of the target audience for this. I have quite a few industry friends that have said the Bluebird palettes are their absolute favorites. It's also worth noting that their inks, so the alcohol inks, I have the white one that I bought for Jayla. They are super concentrated and thick and really pigmented. So they are kind of more like concentrates than like the normal inks that you can just pour and use right away. So even if it seems expensive for the little bottles of the liquid inks, you're actually having to dilute them quite a lot of alcohol, so they do stretch quite far. For me, my favorite Bluebird product is this pale skin palette. So I really like that there are a variety of undertones and super pale flesh tones. I've gotten quite a lot of use out of this palette. So you can see it goes from the standard kind of warm skin tones of a yellow base to more orange. You've got more green, you've got a pure white if you need to mix it in and make any of these lighter. You've got more of the kind of really cool purple toned through to like an orange like tattooed concealer color here as well. So yeah, a whole variety of really pale undertones here, which I really appreciate and use quite a lot. So my closing thoughts on this ramble about palettes is I'm never gonna have just one brand in my kit. I have favorites for different things, and each ones have different strengths, and I reach for a different palette depending on what I'm using it for. So, you know, I feel like that's kind of the main comparison that you're going to get from this. It's always going to be logical to have a lot of products in your kit. You're never going to find someone who has just the one brand of foundation. Like, you know, you need to accommodate for lots of different scenarios. So that's why I carry these 3 different kinds with me. And I'll probably end up expanding my collection more and trying out different palettes as well, just because I'm addicted. So I think in terms of me doing a wound coloring, using different kinds of pinks, or like using that subtle like cool tone, this is my favorite palette for that. Like, you're gonna have to pry this out of my cold dead hands. I also love how transparent the colors are in here. So as I said before, if I need a really nice transparent blue, like, it really helps to have something that's not too pigmented, because that's exactly what I need it for in that moment. If I'm doing something where I need like really good pale flesh tones, like 100%, I'm gonna be reaching for my Bluebird pale flesh tones palette, or pale skin palette, sorry. If I need a really pigmented color, if I'm trying to hide something, say like if I'm going over tattoos or something like that, I'm going to reach for probably the Endura palette, or also the pale skin toned palettes. These have quite a lot of pigments, especially in this orange concealer for like the kind of blue age tattoo color. Out of all of them, after speaking about the pale skin tones, the palette which has the lightest skin tone without having to mix any white into it was actually in the SKT Light to Dark. They've got this neutral one, and that is the lightest skin tone that I have in my collection. So if you didn't want to have to be like mixing white into things, this color is lighter than the colors in this one. But then this one usually just has the warm tones and the cool tones, rather than having more of the, you know, oranges and greens and purples and stuff that this one has in it. So when I did the Jayla makeup last year, I had trouble with trying to get like an opaque white coverage, and initially I was using Skin Illustrator. I didn't realize at the time Skin Illustrator isn't really designed to be used opaquely, so I was having trouble getting the coverage from that I wanted. So then I ended up going to the Bluebird palette. I got the pure white, which, as I said before, is really insanely thick, had to thin it down. That worked a lot better for a more opaque coverage. And then I think on the actual film as well, for Jayla's makeup on the movie, they were using European Body Art white, because I could get a lot of coverage from that. And then for the European Body Art, as I mentioned before, you can easily customize your own palettes with the removable pans. And so really, like, depending on what job you have, whatever you're doing with it, like, that is going to determine what you should use. It's so unique to the situation, you know? Sometimes you want opacity, sometimes you want translucency, sometimes you want a lot of pigmentation, sometimes you want really subtle washes. So hopefully that information was useful or interesting, or gives you a bit more about the different brands and the history and the whole crazy world of alcohol palettes. Obviously, like, there's so much more to it than just this, but this is just my own little piece of research that I've been doing this week. Yeah, let me know if there's anything else you'd be interested in seeing. Leave your suggestions in the comments below, and I'll be back soon with the next video. Also, really big thank you to all my Patreon subscribers. The channel's been going through like a weird period with like ad revenue being like way less than it should be. So people that donate to Patreon really help me to get supplies and have the time to put into this channel. So thank you again to the patrons. Yeah, if you're not already subscribed, you can subscribe here, and I'll see you guys again soon.